Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
The faith and work movement wants to bend the gospel back toward economic justice. And in an exception to disability law, Christian pastors can lose their jobs over conditions such as depression or bipolar disorder. Today, we're continuing what we've been working on this year on The State of Us, which is looking at and discussing faith in the modern age. This is one of those topic areas some of you are familiar with. We choose a few of these every year to kind of hone in on and try to cover throughout the year. And this year, faith in the modern age has been one of them. So we've heard from the likes of religious professors and how the Bible came to be, to unbelievers and the backstory behind how atheism rose up throughout history. So today we continue that, but in a very different look at how modern businesses are blending Christianity into what they do and the mental health challenges being faced inside of the church community. But of course, we couldn't begin a conversation on faith and spirituality without
TrueChat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
I really enjoyed both these articles, and I know that we always connect them for the audience to read, and we encourage them to read them. But these two, I really think deserve a read because, as you said, one of them is in our times when we're looking for ways to make us better people. The first one talks about how if you're in your community, what you can do, and some groups that are forming, and maybe you can either start one or become a part of one that exists already in your community, but it brings in a wide range, a great diversity of people. And the other one, taking a look at what do we expect out of people that we go to for help? Do we want somebody who's read everything in the book, or do you want someone who maybe has had some of the same struggles that you have had and has come through it, and so therefore they can talk from their experiences? And the church seems to be struggling with that. So I would highly recommend, even though I always do, but these are two very good articles. And I hopefully everybody gets something out of this, because I really did, and I enjoyed both of them. So what's first here? This
first article, if you want to pull it up on thestateofus.org, it's entitled, "What Would Jesus Do About Inequality?" Now, despite the title, and I shared this with Lance, I think it's kind of interesting because really it's more of a kind of accounting of all of these different groups. And that's sort of what Lance was hinting at around the country and what they're doing. So from the article, in today's evangelicalism, this is where the theological action is. The faith and work movement, which is the intersection of Christianity with the demands of the workplace and the broader economy, in a society that is one of the world's wealthiest, yet persistently inhumane. In politics, responses to the American economy's moral crisis usually split along the lines of the culture war. The evangelical faith and work movement used to be merely another trumpet for this peculiarly American political gospel. But in recent years, the movement has become more ideologically diverse and far more interesting. Participants are moving beyond the idolatry of the free market to a conversation about economic justice that doesn't align so neatly with culture war cliches or party platforms. And that's the end of the quote from the article. So Lance, I thought this was very interesting because you and I think, have long discussed some of the points, particularly in Christian teachings, that seem to get lost or have been overlooked in recent history. And what you're seeing is some groups, particularly millennials, who are in all different professions, from cybersecurity to doctoral students in speech pathology to occupational therapists and public school teachers. These diverse range of individuals coming together in these new groups that probably look less like a Sunday church service and more like a roundtable discussion to figure out ways to improve their communities and use the basis of the Christian faith and teachings as a lens from which to do that. So kind of almost if people go back, if you haven't listened, right, and you go back and listen to our episode with Timothy Beale on his book about kind of how the Bible came to be, part of what we learned in that episode is this is sort of similar to how early Christians did things, right? They met in these small groups. It was very discussion oriented and also very action oriented, practical steps, right? Faith through service and community type of things. So very, very interesting to see this resurgence in interest.
Well, and everybody has an equal voice. It's not led by the pastor or the church community here. As you pointed out, there are teachers, healthcare workers, cybersecurity people. It isn't just a round table of the Downtown Business Association. Not that that's bad, but they're bringing in people from all different sectors of the community and the business world. And then they just sit around and they throw out, okay, here's a problem that we're having, or here's something that we'd like, this is an issue we'd like to discuss. And then you hear representation from all these different groups. So you probably get, as we found out when we do things like that, you get a wide variety of solutions and a wide variety of opinions because you're talking to people who come at it differently because they have different professions and they have a different background. And then what that should help you be able to do is to come to some kind of conclusion that better serves the entire community instead of getting together a bunch of business people who all bring their concerns from the business world aspect, and then their solution is how to make the business better. But they're not talking to their customers. They're not talking to people who maybe have smaller businesses who operate street vendors in the area or whatever. You're getting it from one viewpoint. And the cool thing about this, and there's that boomer word, right? That interesting thing, cool, but it's a really a neat idea to actually allow people to come in, use the church as a meeting place, but it's not really a church service. And everybody's welcome to come in. The pastor's not necessarily leading the situation, but the church historically has been the center of a community, and so whether you go to that church or not, that's a place that everybody knows where it is. It's got the space, and you can go in and discuss these issues that are prevalent across the board in business and for all people, and come to some kind of conclusion that would better serve the entire community and not just the business community.
So I just have to ask Bradley, we got to know, what is the new word here for cool? Cause I'm sure Lance pointed out that can't be right? We've got, what are our options if we're going to say something's cool?
You asking Bradley?
I don't know. I just say cool.
Okay. So see, it's back apparently.
Yeah.
So it's back in. So that's why we've got this great generation, even though, as you guys were telling me off air, that Bradley's generation is bullying my generation.
No.
As
bullying
I said,
millennials. They're bullying millennials.
Oh, he's bullying millennials.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're on the boomer
boomers.
side.
Oh, go. I'm all for that. So
Lance is like, oh, now
let me add my support to that.
What about woke, Bradley?
Yeah, I'm awake.
That word's tossed around. I hear it.
Okay. Not one you use though?
Not frequently.
Okay. You're too woke for woke.
Yeah. I'm too woke to use that word.
So what do you think though about the conversation being about economic justice? Instead, because that's the big changing point here. It's not about how you and I can make more money. It's not how my business can make money, but how can we continue to make money? But in the reality, how can we be a part of the larger community? Which is, I think they're really pretty smart, because if you do that, you're going to get more customers and you're going to make more money. But again, you're not putting the bottom line as the main point of making the decision. You're making the decision based on how I can better fit into the community, which should be, kind of seems to me like that should be what you're doing anyway. But it sounded like by the article, business people had gotten away from that.
I think it's a trend overall, Lance, with millennials, who again, they're fully in the workforce. It'll be interesting to see if Gen Z continues that. But, a lot of millennials care a lot more. And we learned this when we talked to the conference board late or early this year in January about, trends and what workers care about. They care a lot more about where their company stands on different issues, what it's doing to be part of positive change in the world. So, and you see a lot of, especially younger businesses, that are becoming quote unquote B corporations now. So, you have your C corporations, your LLCs, and this B corporation is a special designation that certain businesses can get where it says, yes, we're still out to make money. Like that is our goal, right? Is to make a profit, but that cannot come at the sacrifice of our core principles and values. And we also have to, part of what we do has to be in an effort to improve the world around us, not simply just exploit the world around us. So I think it speaks to a larger trend. I'm glad though to see that the faith community, especially the younger faith community, is starting to embrace that and build off of it, because I think the way that you make it happen is if you have all these different components of our society working together to tackle that.
Well, just to throw it in there really quickly, if you're smart from the faith community side, you're struggling to get attendance, what better way than to open up your building for the community to make the community better?
Right. And it's the same, like you said, kind of the same thing with business. It makes good sense, but it also has the opportunity to do good. So why not do it?
Well, because you have to step outside the box, right? I mean, you have to be a little different. You have to think a little differently. So, but that's a whole nother show.
Well, and that's part of what we're talking about coming up here, Lance, which is the church struggling with mental health in the ranks. This has been a problem for many years. Unfortunately, it's not one that's terribly well documented, but we're going to look at what exactly is going on. Can you simply be fired for admitting that you struggle with mental health if you're in the leadership of a church? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
In most industries, federal law protects workers with disabilities, including mental illness. Church is an exception. Employees, including pastors, are still regularly fired for disclosing mental health problems. That's according to the Wall Street Journal article entitled, "It's Like I Got Kicked Out of My Family. Churches Struggle with Mental Health in the Ranks." So if you want to follow along, you can check that article out. It's got a lot of individual stories, Lance, about different people who were either in clergy or who were church leaders or who worked at a church who were fired after the church found out, or resigned, under pressure after the church discovered that, they had a problem. And I think one of the great examples here,
or they, not to interrupt you, but I'm sorry, or they admitted to the church. They went to the church and said, I need some time off because I'm suffering from burnout, mental depression, whatever you want to call it, whatever phrase. They said, I just need some time off and then I'll come back. And the church said, oh, you're having an issue? Well, don't worry about coming back. You can just leave right now and we'll find somebody to replace you. So it wasn't like, in some cases they tried to hide it because they knew what would happen. But in others, they went to their deacons or to their elders and said, this is the situation. I need 3 months off or 6 months off. And then the church elders just said, okay, we'll see you later. We can't have somebody, air quotes here, weak like you leading our congregation.
And that's exactly, that's very similar to this first example where Brady Herbert, who led a booming church in Waco, Texas, when he came to the church, Lance, the congregation was only a couple hundred members. But then he grew it to an average of more than 1,200 people on Sundays. So very successful, right? And then he approached church elders and said, hey, I'm feeling a little burnout and I need a break. And they gave him paid leave. While he was on leave, though, he evidently chose to see, a mental health professional who diagnosed him with bipolar disorder. And he came back and disclosed it because he felt like, he had an obligation to tell him that he's got a mental health condition, but is taking medication to manage the situation. And a week after he told them that, they basically told him that he would not be allowed to return as lead pastor, and they expect his resignation. Despite, again, the fact that, clearly had very good success, right? I mean, was upping church attendance. I guess depends on how you want to measure success, but I know that's one way that a lot of congregations measure it is, what's attendance look like?
Well, I'm sure if attendance increased, so did, and I hate to say this, but the business of the church, the profits increased. They probably took in more money with more people attending. But here's the thing that's always gotten me, and this goes all the way back to the 1972 presidential election, when a vice presidential candidate had to resign. It was very impressionable to me as an 11-year-old that he had to withdraw his nomination as the vice president because it had been found out that at one time he had sought help for mental illness. And I'm thinking, and as an 11-year-old, I'm thinking, no, wait a minute. So if he has a heart attack and we'll all write him letters and hope he gets to feeling better and encourage him to get back to work. But if so that's a physical illness, right? But if he has a mental illness, he's not ready to be a leader. Isn't illness an illness, and don't doctors treat them? And we use medicines to treat them both, and we make people better. I mean, so since I've been, for the last almost 50 years now, I've never understood how people differentiate this mental illness from physical illness and seeking help for it. I understand people who have mental illness maybe and don't seek help, but that's the same thing as somebody who has physical ailments and they don't seek help. I would think there's something not right there either. I mean, if you have physical ailments, you should be getting them checked out so you can be the best person you can be. And I don't understand this prejudice against mental illness that obviously, like you said, these pastors are doing the job, and maybe because of the stress of the job could be part of the reason why the mental illness is either created or flares up for them. And they're smart enough to go get help. They go see a doctor. Isn't that what we encourage in our society? They go see a doctor and they get help either through counseling or maybe they need some medicine for a while, but then all of a sudden, well, you're no longer able to work. I've never understood that mindset, and maybe you can clear it out for me a little bit, because I just have never heard a decent argument as to why people are that way. If this pastor had had a heart attack and was in the hospital, they'd have sent meals to his family, they'd sent cards, flowers, there'd been visitation, and they would have been welcomed back with open arms once they recovered.
Well, I think it stems right from this it's a carryover of the idea that quote unquote mental illness is separate from physical illness. And I think part of what society is adjusting to is understanding that your brain is a physical entity, and these problems are biological. Now granted, we refer to them as mental because they're taking place in the brain, and there's so much that we don't know about the brain still.
But it's an organ in your body, right? I mean, that's what you're saying.
Right,
yeah.
But it's an organ. Yeah, it's an organ like the heart is, and if your heart valve quits working, like you said, an employer of any kind, religious or otherwise, would probably be crucified if they fired somebody for having a heart attack, right? I mean, that everybody would look at him and be like, what? How is that? That's right. Yeah.
Where's your mercy? Where are you showing mercy and compassion and all the things that we talk about every day when we get together? You're not showing that, but it's here. It's like, yeah, okay. Got to get rid of the crazy guy.
Right. Well, but I think that's the other part that you just touched on is this idea that, and I'm not sure that it's still, I'm sure for some it's probably a conscious thing, but I think it's a subconscious carryover, especially perhaps for some older people, who have been in, more strict conservative churches, that mental issues stem from issues with faith. In other words, you wouldn't be having these problems if you were right with God. Now, I think that, again, whether or not that's conscious, I don't know. Because I think you'd be hard pressed probably to find a lot of people that would say those words just like that. but there might be a feeling down in them that, well, they wouldn't be depressed if they had God in their life. So they must, but again, then see, to me, Lance, even the problem with that argument is, okay, let's just say we're going to roll with that argument, right? And there's a lot of problems with that argument, but even if we're going to roll with that argument, then isn't it your job to help them get better by whatever means necessary?
Isn't that what the church exists for?
Right. Don't you?
Isn't the church supposed to help people in need?
Right. And if they're truly without God, then don't you want them here so they can find God? I mean, again, I don't agree with that argument. I don't think that's a valid argument, but even if you're going to play inside that argument, I still don't see how the right thing to do is to say, well, we're going to cast you out and say that you can't be here anymore.
I mean, I understand the liberal values in a church versus conservative values. I was raised in a very conservative church. It's why, I have a divorce with church. I mean, I still get along with the supreme being just fine, I think. My problem rests with churches. With the institution itself, because of what you just explained. I grew up listening to all this, how we're supposed to be compassionate and caring and serving and helping. And then when we begin to cast people out who need our help, that just doesn't make sense to me. It's illogical based on what the teachings that you gave me. And I understand it. I mean, you explained it very well because I was a part of that. And I know that some of my family feels that way. They would say, oh, no, we need to help them. But yeah, they really shouldn't be our pastor. They really shouldn't be one of our church elders or whatever. And I'm like, I just really struggle with that. And I have for a long time. And I'm one of those older people you're talking about. So maybe I'm either cool or woke or whatever on this topic. But it really frustrates me. And how you can present yourself to a community of people who need help, and you cast out one of your own who needed help and went and got help and was honest with you. So your option is, well, if I want to keep my job, I have to lie to you, which is not one of the things I'm supposed to do. But now I have to lie to you about what I'm seeking help on. That seems counterintuitive to me. And it's just really frustrating. And then churches want to know why people are walking away. Well, it's things like this, it's issues like this that cause people to get frustrated, because as an entity, the church is sending a mixed message. They're saying, they're being, in a sense, and I hate to use this word because it's tossed around too lightly with churches, but they're being hypocritical, right? They're saying we're going to serve and help, but when people need help, we're going to kick them out. And that's just a very frustrating stance for the church to take. And I think it's counterintuitive if they want growth. Right.
Well, I mean, it just seems to go against, like we kind of ended the first segment with, it goes against the idea of whether you're looking at it from a business standpoint or a faith standpoint. Don't you want more people to enter the faith? Don't you want more people to shop at your business? Ultimately, I think part of the problem too, Lance, is these are long-term investments and they're not necessarily the easier route, right? Because the easier route is to just stick with what you know and what you're comfortable with. And if you're bringing in all that outside ideas and helping these people, that's tough work. I mean, that's a lot harder. So I think part of it's you're fighting human nature too, right? Which is this desire to protect yourself. And if you're comfortable and you're happy, it's hard for people to accept that, complacency is the enemy, even if complacency makes you happy, because there's probably other people out there who still need your help.
How in the world are they getting away with this? I mean, it's still a workplace, right? So, I mean, you would, obviously they're not breaking the law, or are they? Or, that's another question.
So what we're going to look at coming up is, why can churches do this? And the answer is probably more obvious than some of us might realize. And then we'll also talk about what is the future of faith and mental health. Does this make Lance and I optimistic, everything we've reviewed today? And where do we see it going from here? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
In an exception to disability law, Christian pastors can lose their jobs over conditions such as depression or bipolar disorder. And in the first segment of the show, we discussed the faith and work movement wants to bend the gospel back toward economic justice. So you've kind of got these two different things going on in the faith community right now. And Lance asked at the end of the last segment, why is this the case? It seems odd, right? Because federal law protects workers with disabilities. However, churches are exempt from that. And the reason the rules don't apply to faith leaders is because in 2012, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of a ministerial exception to the ADA. It's religious freedom, said Myra Creighton, a lawyer in Atlanta who specializes in disability law. Courts don't want to get into telling churches who they may hire or fire. So without getting into the Supreme Court's specific decision here, ultimately, I think it came down to mostly this idea, Lance, that the Supreme Court feared, regardless of whether or not the argument was right, that this sets a dangerous precedent for the court to then get involved in future decisions. And for the most part, right, we know that historically the Supreme Court steers clear of basically doing very little to tell churches what they can and can't do. Same thing with Congress, for that matter. I mean, for the most part, the government avoids that. And from a constitutional standpoint, there is a pretty good reason that they do, which is obviously our right to worship or not worship as we see fit, right? So they run into this issue of, yeah, we should protect everybody, but at the same time, the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land, doesn't give us the authority to directly intervene in church affairs. Now, the counter to that, of course, would be we've allowed churches to become, nonprofit organizations in their own right, and we provide tax structure for them, tax abatement and non-taxing. So we also have legalized, right, marriage. And yeah, we've done so many things over the years that I guess that idea of separation of church and state has blurred quite a lot. Doesn't mean I think we should keep going this way, but I do think it's time for a serious conversation about what is acceptable in terms of hiring and firing practices for churches to ignore, because I'm not sure if ignoring ADA requirements is one of those is that really reasonable?
And I understand that, and I see it. And as a strong defender historically of the separation of church and state, I understand that decision. But then I guess then the only way that we have to take care of the problem is with our feet. And that is we just walk out of the church. And when the church says, well, why aren't you coming back? Well, this is another reason why we're not coming back, whether it's it's not the same thing, but people have multiple issues with the church, and then it's up to the church then to decide how they want to respond to it. So once again, it comes down to that age-old American value that if we don't like this, if we think this is wrong for churches to do, we have to speak up. We either have to speak up within our church and make sure that it doesn't happen in our church or in our ministerial associations in our communities, or that, and if we find out about it, to protest it, nonviolent protest, to say this isn't right. This isn't the way we're supposed to treat other human beings. So I understand the legality of why they can do this, but it just makes me then say to people, okay, if you're made aware that this is going on, are you going to take a stance or not? Do you think this is wrong? I think I've made it clear that I think it's wrong, that you need to help people. And this is just another form of helping people. And for me personally, it wouldn't bother me that if I was talking to someone for some kind of guidance, if they too had to at times seek guidance out. And again, isn't prayer guidance? I mean, so you talk about, well, if you had God or you had Jesus or you had, Allah or whoever in your life, then you wouldn't need it. Well, aren't you seeking help when you go to those supreme beings or those intermediaries? So I don't necessarily, there's an argument to be made there. And so I just think it's wrong to feel like somebody's weak in that because of that. I think that they're making themselves healthier and a better person, which would then make them better for you to talk to because it's somebody who could maybe understand your struggles a little bit more than somebody who didn't. I don't know. There's nothing wrong with reading a book and figuring it out, but first person histories or people who have experienced it tend to have a more interesting story and are able to teach people better than those of us who just teach straight out of a book.
That I'm on that page, Lance. I think we've talked about mental health a lot over the years, or a good bit. And I think it's the whole, we have to be, and we've seen America as a whole, right, shift toward a willingness to be more open. And one of the reasons that our statistics are improving on the number of Americans with depression, what I mean is our accuracy of statistics is getting better, is because people are more willing in anonymous surveys to tell people of that. It is kind of crazy to think about that even, not that many years ago, we had real problems with people, not even in an anonymous survey, were comfortable disclosing that information. And that's a historic problem across the board of different issues where we don't get accurate numbers because people they're not comfortable admitting it to themselves because of societal pressure, let alone, to anybody, even if it's anonymous. So I think and part of the reason we put these together today, Lance, at least from my perspective, is what we talked about in the first segment, which is a Church for Monday, faith in the work movement, right? Those are things that give me hope that the problems that we've discussed in the second segment, along with the trends in America toward being more open and being more compassionate about mental health continues to improve, that hopefully this is one of those things that also improves as a result of millennials getting more involved, but getting more involved kind of in, I almost don't want to say non-traditional, because if we're going ultra traditional, then we're going all the way back to what the first Christians did. And I think this is more in line with the way they did things. So maybe our idea, right, going back to the basics. There we go. That's maybe the way to say it. But I wanted to share, and I took time to look this up between the segments because we've talked about it before, but I think it's very appropriate, just kind of the whole situation, right? Whether we're talking about how do we meet and how do we serve the community, through a Christian lens or through a faith-based lens. How do we go about that? How should we view mental health? I always come back to, Lance, I've quoted this before, Matthew 25, and this is from the New American Standard Bible. And it's chapter 25, verses 41 through 45. And it reads, "Then he," referring to God, "will also say to those on his left, 'Depart from me, accursed ones, into the eternal fire which has been prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, you did not visit me.' Then they themselves also will answer, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not take care of you?' Then he will answer them, 'Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me.' These will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." And that's where it ends. I think it's to the extent that you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me.
One of the stories that I was told from a very young age, that you help everybody, that you don't worry about what they look like or what they smell like or what their problem is or what they're wearing or what they don't have on. That's not the point. The point is you help the person. And that was always what was centered on that. And I think I need to just very quickly, because I know we're running out of time, but people sometimes get the mistaken impression that I'm a more of a pessimistic person because I'm always bringing up the issues of the problem with something. But what I really am is optimistic, because what I'm trying to do by bringing up the things that I believe are wrong is trying to make things better. So really, I'm an optimist. I really think that, as you said, many of the things we're seeing taking place among the younger generations to get back to the basics of the church are very thrilling, are very making me feel very good about what could happen in the future. To see, and we've talked about this before, how millennials, when they didn't have money, now they're starting to make a little more money, but when they didn't have money, they volunteered their time so much more so than anybody else. And the value of doing that, and how so many people will say, well, I don't have the time, and they just give the money, but there needs to be people to implement the program. And millennials in their short history have always been above in donating their time. And now that they get some money to go along with that, if they keep that up, that just means greater things for us. And then we can tackle some of these issues where, unfortunately, the church falls short. But that doesn't make the church necessarily a bad entity. I know that I have struggles with it, but there are more and more churches where I could see myself attending because they don't do these kinds of things. They are trying to incorporate the entire community. They are doing outreach to segments of society that the church typically hasn't done, the recent church. And they're going back to the way Jesus said it. So all in all, I am optimistic. I know sometimes people tend to feel like, man, he must be a pessimist because he's always bringing up the bad side. But I'm bringing it up because I think there's hope that we can make a difference. If you find out this stuff is going on and you don't like it, then we can make a difference. And that's where the optimism comes in, is that I believe in the human race to do the right thing, that as a whole, we as humans are good people and we will do the right thing if given the choice. But unfortunately, many of us don't know about things that are going on, which is why I enjoy doing this podcast.
Because it speaks to our mission, right, Lance?
Exactly. Our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. So to bring this up isn't me being pessimistic. It's to get the word out so that, well, I didn't know that was going on. I'm going to talk to my pastor about it, or I'm going to talk in my Christian education class. I'm going to bring this up because maybe other people don't know about this, and we can do something about it. And so in that way, I'm optimistic, and it goes right along with our mission statement. So if you've enjoyed this show, you need to get out there and talk to people and let them know about it and tell them that they can listen. And, you can find us on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and anywhere else fine podcasts are found.
To understand problems and then to fix them, you must first be aware of their existence. For the State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our producer, Bradley Butch, for making this possible, and thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.